Hello YouTube! Recently, Jeff Nippert put out a video criticizing his own science-based approach to fitness. Something that I found personally extremely commendable because self-criticism is extremely rare on YouTube, especially in these spheres. That being said, I also noticed that the video focused entirely on specific fitness advice and left out the most interesting aspects of why science-based lifting is under attack in the first place, namely the attitude of science-based influencers, but also the oftentimes disingenuous methods that they use to promote their practice. I'm certain that Jeff didn't include these because it wasn't relevant to him, or maybe he's not necessarily aware of that since he's from the other side of the question. And because of that, I feel like this is my duty in a way to add onto the list. So, in this video, I'm going to list 10 questions, 10 things that I want to ask science-based influencers regarding their practice that should also open their eyes to the reason why they get so much criticism. So if you are a science-based content creator or if you're just someone who describes themselves as science-based, feel free to answer them in the order of your choice. This video is not targeted at Jeff in particular, it's targeted at anyone who feels under attack or who again describes themselves as science-based. It's an open letter to science-based influencers. Question number 1. Why do you pretend to not understand that when we're attacking science, we're really attacking you? This is something that we see a lot, that Jeff even mentions in his video where he says that he's afraid that people will think that his ego is hurt by the criticism of science-based. It should be hurt because it is directed at you. The truth is that very few people have an issue with the concept of science. I have never met someone who said, the scientific method is a hoax, it's a conspiracy, I'm against it. We all pretty much agree that it's needed and necessary. What we don't like is the interpretation of it. So if I criticize your approach to science, when it comes to fitness, I'm not anti-science. If anything, I am profoundly scientific because I defend the scientific method. I feel like this is often misapplied on purpose to describe people who don't like a certain agenda that is hidden behind a study or discovery, in which case I think this is disingenuous. If I were to explain personally, my bone to pick with science-based influencers is that I find that oftentimes they start with a preconceived notion, something that they like, that is emotionally charged, and then they will cherry-pick studies to try and justify why this thing that they liked in the first place is best. This is not proper in my opinion. Then they will also go out of their way to openly disregard any information that might go against their headcanon, and that is also anti-scientific. Sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it's just that the influencer in question is unlikable. And if you're an unlikable shitbag, you can be as science-based as you want, people are still going to attack you because what they're attacking in reality is the person behind the science. The problem being that these very same types then go on to use science as a shield, or they will say, well, these attacks, these personal attacks that are clearly ad hominem, are actually attacks against science. No, they're attacks against you. Science is the conduit, it's the excuse. You're no Nikola Tesla that's being somehow persecuted or oppressed for your discoveries that are going to revolutionize the world. You're just some guy who read a study and made a video about it, and people don't like your interpretation, so they attack you on that. That's it. But doing this is a form of self-victimization that is, to me, not honest, because it allows science-based influencers to dodge criticism by pretending that they're persecuted for their beliefs, when in reality they're persecuted for the content of their character or the quality of their information. So that was question number 1. Question number 2. Why do you keep acting as if science-based content isn't a gimmick? I've noticed that the majority of science-based content creators have this righteous attitude to them, as if they were doing something to further science or to somehow make the world a better place. Let's be clear, you're doing that for the most part because it's popular. There are very few cases where you can tell that the guy is actually into science as a passion project. The majority, they saw it's a profitable gimmick that makes you famous quick, and so they jumped on the bandwagon. The proof of that being that you just have to look at most of these people's credentials. The majority of them are not scientists. At best, they're good at interpreting the science, so that makes them glorified middlemen in a way. But that's not even the majority of them. The majority of them can't even interpret studies properly. as demonstrated by the amount of times a science-based influencer will use a study to prove a point, even though if you go on to read the study, you'll see that it says the exact opposite of what they're claiming in their videos or Instagram posts. And yet, the second someone identifies as evidence-based, they automatically gain this aura of competence and credibility, and they get to make wild claims that if I or people who are experience-based would make, we would be crucified on the spot. People would say, what's your source? What are your credentials? But paradoxically, the people that should have the credentials to show for their claim because they're apparently basing them off of rigorous scientific studies, they don't have to do that. To me, it should be the exact opposite. If you claim to be science-based, there should be an extra layer of scrutiny added to your work. And the fact that there isn't is really making the few legitimate science-based communicators on the platform look super bad. Because by association, people think, well, here's one bad apple, here's two bad apples, the entire batch must be bad apples. And I understand that this is not fair to the few that put in the work. But that's the reality of why science-based content is under attack. Because you get a bunch of bros who are putting science-based in their titles and they're getting popular from it. And I think this proves that there is an issue because there is no filter. If anyone can tap into this trend, into this gimmick, then this shows that there is an issue with the gimmick and the way it's being propagated on social media. Because it also retrospectively proves that the average person on YouTube Fitness or Instagram or TikTok is absolutely incapable of distinguishing between real and fake science. And that leads me to my question number 3. Why do you refuse to admit that this entire thing works like a cult? Realistically, maybe 1 out of 100 people actually read the studies that science-based influencers reference in their videos. And that's, to me, being generous. Meaning that the entire thing runs on trust. And trust should be the enemy of science. But I don't see this as something that bothers science-based influencers. They seem to relish in it. They seem to relish in the fact that they can say whatever they want and they know they will not be challenged on it. So based on this, it's hard to deny that the famous science-based influencers have a role that is extremely similar to that of a prophet or a cult leader. They get a direct message from God or whatever entity communicates with them, which in this case is the science in quotations, and then they go on to relay this message to their audience, which either doesn't possess the ability to actually go on to check if the message is legitimate, or simply doesn't care, because they trust the influencer to do the brain work for them. Then there's also the fact that one of the fastest ways to blow up in science-based spheres is to suck off one of the top dogs. It's to essentially bow down to your new cult leader and your prophet, hoping they give you, in a sense, a shout out or they give you attention so that their followers become your followers. And it's something that I've seen times and times again, which shows that for science-based influencers, you don't really get big and blow up off of the merit of your own scientific work. You blow up off of how much you're willing to suck up to the guy that's higher in the hierarchy. Which, if I were to use an analogy, is the equivalent of having to kiss the Don's ring to be able to climb the ranks of the mafia. And I think that this is an apt analogy because to me, science-based lifting and the influencers that make up the community, they behave a lot like a mafia. It's either you are with us or you're against us. If you want to be part of the family, you have to be approved by someone that's higher up. And that's the only way for you to tap into this cash cow that is science-based content. But there's an issue with that. Because when you run things like a mafia, you also tend to attract unsavory individuals who are not there to help others, who are not there for the sake of science, they're simply there for their own benefit and their own fame. Which leads to question number 4. Why do you not police your own? I personally am a bit of an asshole, admittedly, and I police the fuck out of other natural lifters that are within my community. Because when they start spouting bullshit that gets people hurt or demotivates people, I'm going to step in and say, no, you don't get to do this because you are hurting the community as a whole. I rarely see that within science-based spheres. And that's explained because of what I said in question number 3, it's a mafia, and if you start to point out fingers, people are going to get suspicious of the entire affair and you essentially risk losing your own business. But still, it's getting to the point that it's not just clueless bros using science-based to get views. Now I'm starting to see non-lifters, people who are not even partaking in the hobby, being able to infiltrate our community by claiming to be science-based. And I know that this is contentious to start with because a lot of these influencers seem to believe that you can know everything there is to know about lifting and be a good fitness educator even if you don't lift yourself. That to me is completely nonsensical. I've already made a 40-minute long philosophical video about it that you can access in the description. I will not talk about that again today. Instead, I want to know why the few competent science-based influencers, who for the most part are practicing what they preach, are okay with being essentially used like a Trojan horse by people who then go on to spread complete misinformation in the name of science. Like, I'm generally curious, how do you live with yourself knowing that you're inviting in dishonest agents that talk out of their asses because, well, they don't have the experience to back up whatever they're claiming, who then go on to hurt the very people that you're attempting to help? The worst being that if someone like me was to attempt to call out these people, I wouldn't be able to because they would be able to hide behind the shield of science. And they would most likely also be protected by other people within the community. So truly this one perplexes me. I understand that most likely the reason is because the big names in the industry love having a bunch of people follow them around. They love the attention, they love the worship, but still the damage to the quality of the content that is being produced by the science-based crew is getting worse and worse and worse, and that is one of the reasons. So at some point, something is going to have to happen because the distrust for science-based content is growing and growing and growing, and eventually there will be a tipping point. Next up, question number 5. Why do science-based influencers so rarely take accountability when they're wrong? You know, a telltale sign that you're in a court is the fact that the court leader enjoys absolute authority without ever having to explain why he's right or needed to even own up to being wrong in the first place when his teachings are demonstrated as being false. I've personally seen science-based influencers be wrong a number of times, more than I can count in reality, but I've never seen one apologize for having promoted bad science. Instead, what they'll do is, they'll simply pull a new study out of their bag and say, oh, well, the old study was bad, but this one is okay. Pay attention to this one, guys. And I don't think it's an honest way to do business. Because at the end of the day, you're the one who interprets the study. If the study was faulty, you should have been able to see through it. The fact that you presented it to your audience and it turned out to be bunk is on you. It's not on the study. The study is a piece of paper. But now we're starting to really get into the nitty-gritties of these disingenuous methods I was talking about. When you criticize people who are science-based, they get to claim that you're anti-science and they essentially deflect your arguments. And when it's proven factually they were wrong, they can just default the blame onto the literature. If you're an experience-based bro and you're caught giving bad advice, you're going to have to swallow your pride and apologize. Unless you're willing to just shit on your own reputation. And I think that this is healthy. Holding influencers to a high standard of honesty is healthy because it protects the quality of the information. And you could rightfully say that that was the point of science-based lifting, because it's evidence-based, so you have to provide evidence. But we see that this is not what is happening. Actually, the opposite is happening. Because science-based influencers benefit from such immense social proof attached to the concept of science that they get to just shrug their shoulders, say whatever they want to say, because they'll know they'll always be protected at the end. And they also know that most likely, if someone dares emit a criticism against them, it's going to be easily pushed away. And that leads to question number 6. Why is there so little tolerance for criticism within the science-based community? You would think that a training methodology that is based on data and evidence would produce people who are open-minded and able to discuss rationally. But as I said, the exact opposite seems to be true. We're seeing now more and more science-based influencers who are incredibly aggressive in the way they communicate with the audience. And that also now is starting to expand to the audience itself, because as someone who has never been shy about criticizing science-based content, I can tell you that whenever I do, and it starts to, in a sense, exist outside of my community, and people who are science-based start to find my videos, find my arguments, the level of rhetoric that I receive from these guys is bottom of the fucking barrel. It's not what I would expect it to be. They tend to be hyper-dogmatic, which is the enemy of science, And also they tend to be super fanboys who just repeat their favorite influencers' gospels as if they were gods and themselves dogs. And that's very concerning. Try to say, for example, anything remotely negative about Mike Israetel in any sphere that contains some of his fans and prepare for the tsunami of shit that you're going to receive. It's akin to opening the 7 gates of hell. Suddenly you are faced with an ocean of gremlins that are ready to crucify you for daring to attack the great Dr. Mike. And I don't think he dislikes that, because I don't see any attempts at trying to correct that behavior. And understand that we are not in full control of our communities. I would never claim that, because I know I have unsavory people in my community as well. That's unavoidable. But this atmosphere of having to be either pro-science-based or anti-science-based, to me, reeks of tribalism. And that is something that was created 100% by science-based content creators, because, let's be clear, they are everyone's daddy. They are the ones who are running the show. They are the ones who have the most popular gimmick of the age. And so they are the ones who also set the discourse. So when they claim to be under attack, I think we should all take a nice look back and realize that all of that stems originally from them and the way they communicate. A style of communication that is incredibly black or white that naturally is going to trigger a reaction because it's divisive in nature. A perfect segue into question number 7. Why do science-based lifters keep pretending that you're either science-based or some troglodyte that is just throwing weights around? Why is there no middle ground? In his intro of his video, Jeff describes it as the just lift mentality. And I agree that this mindset is unfortunately fairly prevalent with a small portion of the lifting population. But the truth is that we are getting more and more people interested in programming, interested in logging and paying attention, because these very same people quickly realize that, hey, that's a very good way to keep making progress. People are selfish and they are going to be progress oriented. If something works, they are going to do it. So to me, this entire idea that there is this divide between the two camps is a fabrication. And it's a fabrication that science-based lifters feed into because they benefit from the divide. That way they are able to tell to their audience, hey, you guys are on the right side of history, you are with the science, and you're going to get optimal results. Look at all of the baboons in the zoo that don't do that. Do not be like these people. It's a divide and conquer strategy that is as old as time itself, but that is done by these influencers in a way that is very covert, where they would never own up to it, of course. But just take one look at Jeff's video. At some point, he claims that anyone who tracks their weights in the gym is science-based. What type of shit is that? People were tracking their weight in the gym 100 years ago, when science-based content didn't even exist. How could this be a criteria for being science-based? Is the bar really that low? No, I think that Jeff just said that because, again, he's feeding into the divide. He's trying to create this idea that there is a clear distinction between the smart lifters, who are all science-based, and the dummies, and you don't want to be a dummy. So it means that you agree with science-based content, right? Well, no, wrong. I will not fall for such a vulgar attempt at semantic manipulation. Because who the fuck just shows up to the gym and picks random weights? I mean, even the most bro of all bros still knows exactly how much weight he benches and for how many reps. He knows this better than his own mom's birthday. So once we accept that fact, we see that this, that I just described, ce montage rhétorique, is in a sense an attempt at creating a caricature of the anti-science lifter that doesn't really exist, but serves as a very convenient strawman because it's an indefensible position. And to be clear, science-based influencers are not the only one doing this. Experience-based lifters, for example, love the idea of a legion of small and super nerdy science-based lifters that are going to be using the pink dumbbells forever and be small for the rest of their existence. Why? It's because it appeals romantically to their imagination. That way, they can portray their side as the tough, alpha, masculine badasses who just lift weights or are gigantic, as opposed to the weak, cocked badass that use science and will never see results. All of this is in service of an agenda. But the truth is that, just like with politics, most people are somewhat in the middle. And this is where most people belong, because this middle-of-the-road approach to lifting, between experience and science-based, tends to benefit the majority. And I'm certain that a ton of science-based lifters would agree with me. But that's never what they would defend in their videos. Because what they're selling is less of a training methodology and more of a training philosophy. It's much more about belief and identity than it is about method and being practical. And talking about belief and identity, this leads us to question number 8. Why are you obsessed with optimization? I ask this in earnest because as an hypertrophy bodybuilding channel, I'm also obsessed with optimizing my training and my advice for the sake of bodybuilding. But the reason why, in my case, is one that is rooted in my past. I spent many years training for strength that people had convinced me would then give me size, and I saw no results. And I got injured and I got fat. And so when I did my homework and I started to modify my approach, I realized, hey, the way to do this is to optimize for hypertrophy, and to do this, you have to have an hypertrophy-oriented mindset. That is the essence of natural hypertrophy. But my little finger tells me that this isn't why most science-based lifters claim to be optimal. I think they do it because they know it plays off of people's fear of missing out. Everyone is terrified of doing the wrong exercise and leaving gains on the table, to the point that most people will straight up refuse to do anything unless they know for certain it will work, which anyone who has accomplished anything in the gym or outside of the gym will tell you is completely unreasonable. And when a novice makes that demand, your duty as an educator should be to tell them, hey, this is a form of anxiety that will just prevent you from making progress. Try things and see if they work out. Don't wait for confirmation by science or anyone else. And the truth is that for the majority of the existence of modern fitness, it's exactly the way that we worked. People are told, train and lift and refine as you do that. But roughly 15 years ago, with the arrival of science-based content, we saw this very same attitude being attacked as being anti-scientific because it's not optimal enough. And I'm certain a lot of science-based influencers think they're doing a good thing by doing this because they're furthering the science and the methods, but in truth, they don't seem to realize that there is a mismatch with their audience. Because when you talk fitness on social media, give or take 90% of the people who watch you are novices. And they don't need that shit. Optimization for a novice is the surest way to stay a novice forever. But maybe some of these people have forgotten what it's like to be a novice, and they tell themselves, well, if back then I knew what I know now, my progress would have been faster. Yes, perhaps, but back then you are not the man that you are today. The mindset you developed by just training is the one that served you best to get to where you are. Then you refined, then you optimized. So when you go on to feed into the neuroticism that is prevalent on YouTube Fitness, by promising people 30%, 40% more growth with this method, no that method, no this exercise, no this tempo, well, what you're doing is you're just keeping people in that endless loop of hesitation. And this is really the nature of the audience that I perceive for science-based content. It's a bunch of people running after cars. But just like a dog running after a car, he will never catch it. But as long as the car remains in view, he will keep chasing. And the car in this analogy is each new study that is being presented to this audience that just serves as an excuse to plunge them times and times again into this frenzy of media consumption that keeps them guessing, oh, maybe I should change my program, I should do this instead or do that. And that is exactly what optimization has become on YouTube Fitness. And why I'm against it, even though this is still something that I will preach, it's because it's the carrot that gets the donkey going. But if the donkey never gets to bite the carrot, then who benefits? Whoever rides the donkey. In this case, influencers. If you're just someone who's a passerby on these platforms and you're consuming that content, always remember this. Perfect is the enemy of good. And that relates to what I said in my most recent video about standards. You can go check out if you missed. All right, question number 9, only 2 questions left. And this one is controversial. Why do you welcome PED users in your ranks? If the goal of science-based lifting is to optimize hypertrophy or performance by paying attention to very minor details of training. Then logically, people that get massive improvements in both size and strength without paying attention to these parameters, simply by injecting anabolic steroids, should be automatically dismissed from the equation. Because how do you justify splitting hair to that level to optimize when whatever orals or injections you get does 1,000 times that? I mean, one of the biggest names in the industry of the science-based content is Mike Israetel, who is openly on steroids and who works with people who are openly on steroids. And that doesn't automatically mean that his methods are wrong, only that it makes them dubious. Because when looking at the people he trains or himself, there is always the doubt of, do they look like this because of the way they train or because of what they take? Ultimately, despite being evidence-based, every single science-based influencers will resort to the "it worked for me" argument to defend our method, including Jeff. But in the case of Israetel and the people he coaches, it literally didn't work for him or for them. Because in his case, he failed to achieve a good natty physique without the drugs. And the people that got big off of his methods that he shows off on this channel are also on said drugs. So what would be very interesting is to look at people who are not on drugs who train in that exact same fashion. Now, I will gladly admit I'm out of the loop. I don't follow what the fuck he's doing. I understand that at this point he's like starting to actually track progression of people that he trains or trains following his methods. And that is going to be a very great way to assess if his methods work. I can tell you, however, that these cyborgs exist outside of this controlled environment because I meet them in my gym and I discuss with some of them. And what I've seen with my own two eyes is really, really concerning. Because I keep running into natural lifters who are doing things in the gym like slow tempo lateral raises with 10 pounds. And when I chat with them and I'm trying to understand where this is coming from, they oftentimes point out Israetel's content, saying that they heard that this was the best way to get big. And the amount of convincing it takes to make them realize that no, that is not going to work and that you're using methods that are for very advanced people, but you're not even progressively overloading, you're not actually going to failure, which is the cornerstone of building muscle, it actually is difficult. Because these people have been in a way, not brainwashed, but indoctrinated into this idea that you can build a good natural physique while putting in what I would consider minimal effort and banking it all on the way in which you administrate the volume. That is such a peculiar approach. I've never thought like this when I was a novice. And so this leads me to question the necessity of science-based content when I realized that many people would have been better off if they had never discovered it. They would have had healthier training experiences if they had just went with the flow and done whatever the fuck. And you must admit that this is a far cry from what the science-based influencers pretend to be providing for the community. Now, I could just be a hater and be wrong, and I really hope I am. I truly hope that this entire science-based content is going to usher in a new era of natural monsters. I just don't buy it. And that is because, question number 10, why do you pretend this thing is new? In his video, Jeff said that it's a relatively new way of training. And it's true in the sense that it's new as a social media phenomenon. But the majority of what is presented nowadays as breakthroughs in the world of biomechanics or exercise science has been in the literature for the past 30 years. And the rest, the contemporary discoveries, the studies on volume, intensity, tempo, partials, lengthen this, all of that, the majority of that is never conclusive, or it just consists in the same 10 studies that come out with slightly different parameters, some of which are very dubious, which often results in completely different findings. And this is why, if you are someone who follows science-based content, you most likely constantly get bombarded with, this new study proves that more volume is better. No, less volume, more intensity, less frequency, this, that, this. Nothing agrees with nothing. And if you had paid attention, you would have realized that it's on purpose. Because if science was able to come out with a conclusive study stating this is the optimal amount of sets per week for this muscle group, what do they talk about then? How do they continue dangling the carrot? They can't. So this endless flow of studies participates in what I was describing previously, which is that science-based content on social media is a glorified form of vulgarization. It takes apparently obscure studies and makes them available to the masses, not to inform them, because As we saw, there's nothing conclusive in these studies that would serve as proper information, but rather as a way to keep them entertained. Because unfortunately, science tends to be pretty dry. I don't know if you ever sat down and read a scientific study from line 1 to the end of the thing, from cover to cover. Snooze. It's really fucking boring. Unless you're really, really into that. But the reality is that the majority of people are not really into that. But as you might have noticed, suddenly, with science-based content being widely available, everyone is into science, and it extends past fitness. Look at the amount of channels or pages that create vulgarization content for mathematics, for philosophy. Look at how many views these get. Do you really think that many people are into philosophy? No, it's because whatever is presented to them is a bastardized pop version of philosophy that is much more accessible, but also much less effective. And that is because it's not really philosophy. A large part of philosophy is being able to digest it yourself and come to your own conclusion. And the same is true with science. Now, I understand that this goes against the agenda of mass control that is attached to science nowadays, but as a helpless romantic and as an educator, I personally would like it if people came to their own conclusion. Of course, science-based influencers can't have that, because if you come to your own conclusion, then you don't need them anymore and they lose their job. So instead what they'll do is, they'll take a scientific study, then they'll mix it with a lot of editing and a bunch of influencer tricks to make it more palatable, so that now they can feed it to the average person and it becomes popular. But the issue is that this transformation process, this processing of science, if you will, dilutes it to such an extent that it can scarcely be called science anymore. I therefore propose that we rename it with the more accurate term of finds. It's science without the rigor of the scientific method, but with a lot more fun, hence the finds. It is essentially what Kellogg's cereals is to oatmeal. A tastier, but significantly less healthy alternative. But hey, it doesn't take any effort to make on your part, and it tastes better, so I suppose it must be good for you. But that is that. These were my 10 questions for science-based lifters. So feel free to add your own question to the list in the comments. Unfortunately, with Christmas being already behind us, we won't be able to send it to Santa this year, but you can send it to your favorite science-based influencers and see if he has answers for you. At the end of the day, Jeff opened the door for criticism and for self-reflection. If you enjoyed the video, you can support the channel on the Ko-fi page. There's the first link in the description. You can pledge $3 to $5 a month or make any donation you want, and that is a tremendous support for me. I would also encourage you to follow the page because a big announcement will happen on Wednesday, January 1st, and you don't want to miss it. But that's going to be it for me today. As always, thank you for watching, have a good night, and I'll see you again in 2025.